discussion. Thank you. All right. Who's kicking us off tonight?
All right. I want to welcome you all to the San Francisco Bay Area Black and Jewish Unity Coalition, our general monthly meeting. I want to remind everyone that we have 3 committees, a civic engagement committee, which we meet on the first Thursday of the month at 6 p.m. We have our criminal justice and prison reform committee that we meet on the last Tuesday of the month at 5 p.m. and our community and economic development committee, which we meet on the 4th Thursday of each month at 6 p.m. I want to welcome you all, and please leave a comment in the chat box with your name and any affiliations that you may have. I am Brent Turner, one of the co-leads, along with Malcolm Gism. And also I want to invite you all this Saturday to the Fillmore District in San Francisco to participate in the Juneteenth celebrations. Everyone will be muted during this program. Our Q&A session will take place at the end, so any questions that you may have, please leave any questions in the comment box. And I'm going to pass it on to Ann Rubin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Brent. I also wanted to acknowledge our co-founder and co-lead, Malcolm Gism. I don't think he's on the Zoom yet. Many of you know Malcolm. And Rabbi Beth Singer from Temple Emmanuel, one of our co-founders. The Unity Coalition has been studying and working on reparations for more than 2 years, 3 years at this point. Many of you have been involved. We've had several programs. It's nice to see people who have attended those programs as well as new people. Our big program was our teach-in in September 2022 at Shereth Israel. And that was with Dr. Weber, the mother of the state reparations bill. It was also included Eric McDonald, who signed up for the meeting tonight. He might be with us. He was the chair of the San Francisco Reparations Task Force. At the meeting, we had Dr. Theopia Jackson, a psychologist, who also signed up. I can't tell if she's on yet, but she may be joining us, and I hope so. It'll be great to see her. And we had Dr. Brown, head of the NAACP, Third Baptist, and vice chair of the state task force. Last year, we had a meeting with Ms. Tanish Collins, who was vice chair of the San Francisco task force. And we had a meeting with Don Tamaki, who is on the state task force. And that was co-hosted by Rabbi Amy Eilberg, who I am looking for now. Does anybody see Rabbi Amy Eilberg on the screen? Well, I hope she's going to pop in. Rabbi Amy Eilberg was going to give our blessing tonight. So hopefully she'll be on in a minute or two. I wanted to thank Chris Lodgson and CJEC and all the other groups working on reparations. I know that many of you are from other groups that are working on reparations. And I want to acknowledge those who have been working in the movement for decades, for more than 40 years. Now is the time for allies. So thank you to all the allies on the screen tonight. Wanted to make a light fundraising pitch. You can start reparations now. The Unity Coalition is a totally volunteer-run organization, but we do have some expenses, our website, our email list. I'll put a PayPal link in the chat. Our programs are always free, but we generally pass the hat amongst our regulars. And let's see, I will also mention about Juneteenth. This is in the Fillmore. If you'd like to join us, maybe you know our yellow umbrellas. I have to paint. I'm all out of yellow umbrellas. This is my paint. I'll be painting yellow umbrellas tonight, so you know what to look for. You've maybe seen those photos in some of the news stories. And we're going to meet on Fillmore and O'Farrell at the fountain about 2 to 3 o'clock, the window, if you want to catch up with us. But it's a lot of fun. There's music, there's food. Bring your families. And the Zoom is wonderful, but we do talk about getting together now and then. I think it's really important. And I hope that we'll see you here. Is Rabbi Amy Alberg here? Something must have happened. I guess she is not here, Lena. So I don't know if, well, Jen probably wants to lead us in prayer. What do you think, Jen? You're good on the fly?
I would be delighted. Thank you
Would
so
be
much.
Terrific. Thank you, Jen.
We hold this space to be one of grace, of love, of learning, of blessing. We hold this space to be a time that we can join together in making this world a better place. And for all of those that we care about, we hold them and lift them up to the divine. Amen.
And thank you so much, Jen, for that thoughtful blessing over tonight's meeting. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lena Robinson, and I have been involved with the San Francisco Black Jewish Unity Coalition since about 2017. And have really just appreciated their commitment to the work of social justice, in particular for African-American members of our community in San Francisco. I also serve as the chair of the Community Economic Development Committee, which is leading that really the work of mobilizing the work within the coalition around reparations. So I am so happy to see you all here tonight. Thank you for making time for this conversation. And the most important thing I think about tonight's evening is the progress that has been made over these several years. And we're so gratified and happy to have Chris Lodgson from the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. He is the lead organizer. He also works with the ARCC, the American Redress Coalition of California, and both of these are grassroots California-based organizations working for reparations and reparative justice for descendants of U.S. chattel slavery living in California. CJEC is one of 7 community organizations selected by the California Reparations Task Force to conduct community outreach and engagement for reparations. Chris was born in New York City, but is currently living in Sacramento and has been a resident of California for the past 10 years. And really what's remarkable before I, turn it over to Chris is just to, realize that it's a state like California that will pave the way, that is setting the framework for something so amazing to happen in this country. And so we should really applaud ourselves for the leadership of the state on moving this issue forward and learn what we can to continue to ensure that progress is made and that we really realize the dream and also of reparations. So with those remarks, Chris, I want to turn it over to you and have you take it away.
Good afternoon, good evening, rather. It is such a privilege, a pleasure, an honor, a blessing to be here. It's interesting because I never felt like I was like a person who experienced imposter syndrome, but like I'm feeling it. Because like you had Dr. Weber here, to speak to this amazing group. And just earlier today, I was in a room with Nicole Hannah-Jones of the 1619 Project. And I'm like, me? So anyway, thank you so much. And this is a theme.
Mari, what happened?
Right on. And this is a theme that would
Mari, what happened?
that will come up throughout what I say today, which is that we are in many ways just regular people.
Mari.
We call ourselves regular. I think somebody's off mute there too. We call ourselves regular Black folks. And so you'll hear me sort of speak to this theme about how regular, ordinary people can do not regular, extraordinary things. And that is something that is going to be very clear as we talk about California reparations here tonight. And then I am really excited to also talk about a lot of what's happening At the state level, we had some big news and some big developments this week, just this week in the last 24, 48 hours. And we have more coming, more is on the way. So I'm excited to talk about that, and also excited to hear and think and talk about your questions, because I feel like that's how we will learn the most and learn the best. And before I say anything else after that, I just want to say thank you again to our Jewish brothers and sisters from across the state. It has been an honor and a privilege and a pleasure and a blessing to work with you over this past year or so now. I've been, I've had the privilege to be invited to speak before our Jewish brothers and sisters here in California several times over the past year, from the congregation B'nai Israel here in the Sacramento area. I went to my first Seder, I went to my first Shabbat, and so I just want to thank you all for really locking arms with us and going to war with us for reparations. So thank you so much. I'll start this the way I normally start things, and then I want to get to some of the important stuff that's been happening. But if you can right now, I'd like you to stop what you're doing. If you're driving, don't stop driving. If you're cooking, don't stop cooking. Okay, maybe turn the flame down a little bit. But every single one of you, every single one of us, right now is sitting and living inside of a history book. People are going to be, and actually already, reading, writing, and talking about what you did, about what we did here and now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40, 50 years from now. And that is because California, as I think most of you know here, California is the first state to create a reparations task force to take the first steps toward reparations for descendants of U.S. chattel slavery. But California ultimately will be the first state to actually do reparations. And that is the context in which I am blessed to join you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about first, CJEC and CJEC's work, really how we got started in this work. I'm going to also review some of the bills that have been making their way through the legislature and the big developments that happened this week, including some very important bills that help end current slavery, and then also some of the bills that help set us up to do real reparations going forward. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how folks can get involved, how you can participate. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the opposition as well. And we had some opposition show up this week, and I wanted to talk about that as well, and just help you understand and hopefully help prepare and equip you for how to respond, both on defense and also on offense, for folks who may be opposed and folks who may be persuadable. And then, I'm very much looking forward to the question and answer, of course, as well. But I do want to talk about, some of the things that are coming next also. So having said that, I just want to give a little bit more about how CJEC got started. As I mentioned, we are just regular Black folks, as we call ourselves. In 2016 and 2017, people who didn't know each other at all, from different parts of the country and different parts of the states, et cetera, started to talk more about reparations on social media and connect and find each other on social media. And at a certain point, after a couple of years of talking about reparations and connecting about reparations on social media, people started to say, let's connect and do stuff offline. Let's actually take this work offline and into the offline world. And in 2019, and then into 2020, but really 2019, some of us here in the Sacramento area and other parts of California too, started to talk to people in the state legislature, specifically, and first, people who worked for then Assembly Member Dr. Shirley Weber, who you've had here, of course, now California Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber, about reparations. And it's interesting because at that point in 2019, there were a couple of reparations resolutions making their way through the state legislature. A couple of reparations resolutions. And these were resolutions that said things like California acknowledges its role in slavery and commits to doing better, things like that. And so we somehow found out about these resolutions and then said, let's go talk to the people who wrote these resolutions about what we like and what we don't like about some of these resolutions and some of the language in it. And so we then, and I said this earlier in an earlier presentation, we actually called the office Assembly Member Weber and said, "Can we speak to Dr. Weber, please?" And they said, "No, that's not how it works. Actually, you have to set up a meeting. You have to come in. You may meet with staff first, and maybe eventually you meet with the Assembly Member." And so we did that. We went into our first meeting. This is May or June of 2019. Going in to speak with Dr. Weber's team. And I want to give a big shout out here right now to one of the unsung sheroes of this movement. And this is a person by the name of Maureen Simmons. Maureen Simmons was an intern in Dr. Weber's office. She was a UC Berkeley student. She had a 6-week internship. And Maureen Simmons is actually the author of the language that would become the Reparations Task Force Bill AB 3121. It is a person, a Black woman in Dr. Weber's office who originally drafted that language, AB 3121. And so we got to the meeting and we sat down with Maureen Simmons, and Maureen's like, "Yeah, we want to do reparations work too. And hey, by the way, we have a reparations bill coming. It's going to create a task force. Would you like to work with us on it?" And we said, of course, yes. And the rest is kind of history, because then we went on to help write the final version of the law that created the Reparations Task Force. That's Assembly Bill 3121. And then we helped lobby the bill to successfully get signed into law by the governor. After that, we then went to help the governor and the speaker and the pro tem of the Senate actually pick task force members. We recommended something like 20 different people to the task force. One of our recommendations was chosen that became the chair of the task force, and that's Camilla Moore. And then we worked with the task force for 2 years after that to help them do all their work. So we went to every single hearing, every minute of every single hearing, as I said earlier this week, every single hearing. We traveled like groupies and roadies from city to city, following the task force, carpooling and doing all that stuff to be at every single hearing of the task force. And then, as the task force finished their work over its, 2 years, we then pivoted to actually reparations policy and reparations legislation. CJEC is a collection of other organizations. So we are a coalition of other organizations who work locally in their specific locations on reparations and reparations related policy, what we call reparative justice across the state of California. So we have a team in the Sacramento area, in the Bay Area, in the Inland Empire, in the LA area as well. And we have folks who work with us as volunteers from all across the state of California. We are an all volunteer organization. We've been really putting our own money, blood, sweat, and tears into this work since we became CJEC, and actually a little bit before that too. And so really this is something that really does run deep in our bones. We are committed to our ancestors, and we're really thankful and humble to be here and to have the privilege and the opportunity to be a part of this work. I say this, and I speak for myself, even though I see members of our team in the chat right now. Big shout out to our team. I feel lucky. Sometimes it is hard to even believe that I'm even a part of something like this, because my organizing and my advocacy work really starts back on the East Coast in New York City. And I share this really, pretty often. I started my organizing and advocacy work formally working inside of New York City homeless shelters, where I was also homeless and unhoused, living inside of those shelters too. And started my organizing work there and learned all about what it meant to organize and fight for change, working with folks who were unhoused inside of those shelters. And I really do feel lucky to be a part of this work right now. If you would have told me years ago that I would be doing this important work right now, I would have not believed you. So I think most of us know that our state reparations task force, finished their work late last year and produced a 1,100-page report with about 115 recommendations, which really documents and then makes recommendations, for what California is responsible for and what California must do to repair and compensate those who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. It's interesting that over the task force's 2 years of work, as they work to do their 3 jobs, and I usually, summarize the task force's work in 3 ways. I say the task force had 2 years to do 3 things: study reparations with a focus on what California was responsible for, slavery. Yes, there was slavery in California. I'm sitting in Sacramento right now. We have, there was a Sacramento Bee story just in the last 2 or 3 years, documenting an attempt to sell an enslaved Black woman in Sacramento County in the year 1864, about a year after the Emancipation Proclamation. So we're coming up on Juneteenth in the next few days or so. So think about that a year or so after the Emancipation Proclamation, there was evidence of an attempt to sell enslaved folks here in Sacramento County, where I'm sitting right now, a year after the Emancipation Proclamation. So study reparations with a focus on what California is and was responsible for. Then educate the people. As we say, bring knowledge to the public. Let the people know, bring awareness about what the task force learned, and to satisfy that work and that task, the task force then went around the state and held 16 public hearings to educate the people, and also asked 7 community organizations, one of which was CJEC, to help them do that work by hosting community listening sessions for reparations across the state of California. And then finally, the task force was required and responsible for making recommendations for reparations. What are the reparations? Who should be eligible? For how much? When? How? All those things. And again, the task force did that work and published it through their final report, which is, again, about 1,100 pages. It's public right now. It's on our website at cjec-official.org/reports. It's also available on the California Department of Justice Civil Rights Division website as well. If you don't have time to read 1,000 pages, that's okay. Our team is actually reading parts of each chapter of that report every Thursday at 7 p.m. on YouTube. Actually, we're going to have folks reading in about 30 minutes on YouTube as well. So, and yes, and thank you, Jen. Yes, the task force executive summary is great as well. We're also looking for volunteer readers. And by the way, I want to thank folks. And I know some folks here, I believe some folks here have volunteered to read. So I want to thank those from our Jewish family who have volunteered to read, because that is very, very helpful. And we need as many folks helping to read those 42 chapters as possible. So study reparations, educate the public, and then make recommendations. Of the 115 recommendations, about 20 of those recommendations made it into bills this year. I want to pause here for another second and put a pin on where we are right now in history. Yes, we've already made history being the first state to create a reparations task force, yes. But as soon as we crossed into that January 1st, date this year, as soon as the new year started, we were also in uncharted territory, because we are the first state to now have introduced bills attempting reparations. There's never been a state that has introduced bills even attempting reparations for descendants of U.S. chattel slavery. So this year, about 20 different bills were introduced based on recommendations of the State Reparations Task Force. And our organization looked through those bills and identified what we believe were the most meaningful, most substantive of those bills, and started to work with senators and assembly members to make those bills become law. And I want to talk about 3 of those bills with 2 honorable mentions. Well, 4 of those bills right now with 2 honorable mentions, and then talk about some of the things that we want to see come next. The first bill I'd like to highlight for you right now, based on recommendations of the State Reparations Task Force, is a bill introduced by State Senator Stephen Bradford, and that's Senate Bill 1403, Senate Bill 1403. That bill is a bill to create a state agency to help implement and monitor laws and policies and programs related to reparations. This agency would be responsible for helping folks apply for reparations, helping folks show that they're eligible, helping folks get their claims and their payments processed. This is SB 1403. And SB 1403 has been making some really good progress through the state Senate and now the state Assembly. The state Senate voted overwhelmingly in favor of SB 1403 just in the last 2 weeks, with over 70% of the state Senate voting yes, 30 votes in favor of SB 1403. And now SB 1403 is in the California State Assembly. And good news, the bill was heard just 2 days ago by the State Assembly Judiciary Committee, and the State Assembly Judiciary Committee voted overwhelmingly in favor of SB 1403 to move that bill forward to the next committee, and then ultimately to the floor of the assembly. SB 1403 and every bill that I'm going to talk about, with the exception of one today, is 2 steps away from the governor's desk. 2 steps away from the governor's desk. So that's SB 1403 to start. It's important to mention that part of the rationale for why we want a state agency to help implement and oversee and monitor reparations policies and programs is because of what we've learned from folks and friends like those in our Jewish American community, those in our indigenous community, those who were survivors of the Japanese mass incarceration, and those who receive reparations for that effort. Almost every reparations effort that we've seen and that we've studied, there's some kind of system, some kind of office, some kind of institution, some kind of agency set up to do the things that the people who propose the reparations want to do. There's some kind of infrastructure set up, some kind of groundwork and foundation set up to then do all of the things. That's partly why we want this agency, but also, as you can tell in the name of the agency, which is called the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency, we do also want to honor our ancestors, specifically those who were helpful with the establishment of the original Freedmen's Bureau, which existed for about 7 years after the end of the Civil War. The State Reparations Task Force proposed a definition of reparations that included 5 forms, and I know you all know these 5 forms: compensation, restitution, rehabilitation, guarantees of non-repetition, and satisfaction equals reparations, according to the California State Reparations Task Force. We really view the creation of this Freedmen's Agency, this Freedmen's Affairs Agency, as part of reparations, specifically a kind of restitution. Because according to the state task force, restitution means the return of land, the return of property, or the restoring of you to where you would have been, could have been, should have been, had all the bad things that happened to you never happened in the first place. So we actually count the Freedmen's Agency as a kind of a form of restitution as well. SB 1403 creates this institution, the American Freedmen Affairs Agency of California. SB 1331, this is the bill that when it was heard this week, got a lot of attention, and there's some viral clips going around right now. If you're on Twitter, or if you're on Instagram, there are some serious viral clips going around right now because of the exchange with some of the members of the committee and Senator Bradford and myself, myself, I was very lucky to give the expert testimony on SB 1331 this week. This bill creates what we call the California Reparations and Reparative Justice Fund. California Reparations and Reparative Justice Fund. This fund would be used to help facilitate funding for all other reparations plans and programs that the state ultimately approves. You can't do reparations without funding. There's no way to do reparations without money from the budget, without line items in the budget going to your reparations programs. And this fund will help facilitate that funding. That's SB 1331. And then the other bill I want to talk to you about here is SB 1050, Senate Bill 1050. This bill, if you're familiar with the Bruce's Beach effort to return property to the family of the Bruces in Manhattan Beach, California, SB 1050 really is a bill to expand what we did for the Bruce's family statewide for descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States. So this bill creates a pathway for individuals who are descendants who've had property taken unjustly by eminent domain to have that property returned to them by the state, or to have a property of equivalent value returned to them by the state, or to be compensated at fair market value for the value of that property. And the agency or the institution that would be responsible for helping to facilitate that return of property is the agency that will be created in SB 1403. SB 1403, SB 1331, and SB 1050 all made it successfully with at least 70% of the California Senate voting in favor of it over the last 2 weeks, and all have been successfully passed as of the last 2 days, were successfully passed out of the California Assembly Judiciary Committee with over 70%, close to 80% or more of that committee voting in favor of those bills and moving those bills closer toward the floor of the assembly, closer to the governor's desk. Very, very important legislation. All introduced, of course, by State Senator Stephen Bradford. There were two other bills that Senator Bradford introduced as a part of his reparations bills that did not make it this year and that we're committed to fighting for again soon, as soon as possible. That's SB 1013. This bill, SB 1013, would provide property tax rebates to descendants who own property or rented property in the amount of, I believe, about $4,000 per year. That bill did not make it to the California Assembly this year. And again, we're committed to working to make that bill successful next year. And then SB 1013, which is a bill that would have created what we call the HADEP program, or the Housing Assistance for Descendants of Enslaved Persons program. And that program would have provided housing assistance grants for descendants who want to own property and own a home. So that bill also did not make it to the Assembly this year, but again, we're committed to making that bill successful next year. And then the final bill that I want to talk to you about today is ACA 8, Assembly Constitutional Amendment 8. This bill, which was introduced by Assemblymember Lori Wilson, who's the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, this bill, ACA 8, would stop forced labor in California prisons, stop involuntary servitude in California prisons, stop current day, modern day slavery in California prisons. Right now, our California Constitution has that same exception clause that our federal national Constitution has. In our California Constitution, it says something like slavery is prohibited, period, involuntary servitude is prohibited, comma, except as punishment for a crime. And that exception has allowed CDCR, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, to force labor in prisons. And I want to give you a sense of what this looks like in practice. So right now, if you refuse work in prison, if you refuse to work, you can have time added to your sentence, have your visitations restricted, be put in solitary confinement. You can have less food, et cetera, et cetera. This is a modern day form of slavery. And this exception and this modern day form of slavery, this exception for what we call involuntary servitude does owe its birth and its origins to the exception clause that was added to our national Constitution at the end of the Civil War. This bill successfully passed out of the Senate Public Safety Committee on Tuesday also, and is now headed to the California Senate Elections Committee. And I have some breaking news. We were just scheduled for hearings in the Senate Elections Committee, and our hearings are on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, June 18th, 9:30 a.m. At the what we call the swing building, so 1021 O Street, room 2100. And we're encouraging folks to show up for public comment and make public comment in support of ACA 8 this Tuesday, June 18th. Again, 1021 O Street, 95814, room 2100. Very important bill. So with the remainder of my time here, and I'll wrap up here because I do want to get to your questions. So I just spoke a little bit about how you can participate in the upcoming hearings for ACA 8. We love folks to show up and make public comment this Tuesday, 9:30 a.m. in support of ACA 8. But we're also asking folks to submit support letters in support of ACA 8, specifically those of you who have organizations. But even if you don't have an organization and you want to, as an individual, support ACA 8, we're asking folks to submit support letters directly to the committee. And I'm going to drop in the chat a link to a sample support letter, and then also a link in the chat to the portal through which you can submit your support letter. But that's not all. If you go to www.caslave.com, that's www.caslave.com, you'll be able to actually find a link to email the folks on the committee directly and tell them that you want them to vote in support and in favor of ACA 8 when it comes before their committee, and also when it comes to the floor of the Senate, we expect very, very soon. There are other ways that you can get involved also to support some of the other bills, specifically the bills that Senator Stephen Bradford introduced that are related to the work of the Reparations Task Force by creating the state agency, by creating the Reparations Fund, and by starting the return of property. So the first thing we ask folks to do is go to our website, www.cjec-official.org, and sign up for current and accurate California reparations news and information. Because it's through our reparations newsletter and our reparations text messages and action alerts that we share support letters, and that we share call to actions for folks to take action in support of the bills that are now in the Assembly and that are now going to the next committee, which is the California State Assembly Appropriations Committee. Specifically speaking, I want to be very concrete with y'all. We need folks to be talking to their elected officials, specifically those who are on the California Assembly Appropriations Committee, and urging them to vote in favor of these bills. I know a lot of folks here are from the Bay Area. The chair of the California State Assembly Appropriations Committee is none other than Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, who's out of the Bay Area. You've also got some other folks who are out of the Bay Area also on that committee also. I believe Matt Haney, Assemblymember Matt Haney, is out of the Bay Area. He's also on that committee. And there are some other folks also, I believe Bauer Kahan, Assemblymember Bauer Kahan as well. So we're really asking folks to reach out to their representatives, specifically in the Bay Area, and tell folks who represent you in the Bay Area to support these bills. If you represent a city or a county in the Bay Area, though, we would really, really appreciate folks who represent cities and counties as cities and counties, or as individuals, who are part of those cities and counties, to reach out to the Assembly members or submit support letters on behalf of your city and county in support of these bills, specifically 1403, 1331, and 1050, as soon as possible. And I want to give a big shout out here right now to the city of Oakland, because the city of Oakland as a city did support SB 1403, 1331, and 1050 in committee this week. And I know that because there was a lobbyist there who spoke on behalf of the city of Oakland. So I want to give a big shout out to the city of Oakland for supporting these bills. There's a lot of other things that you can do also, and I'm looking forward to sharing more about those as well. But with the last few minutes here, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of what we expect to see more of over the next several weeks and couple of months, and possibly a couple of years or more too. So I was always told that the closer you get to your goal, the harder it gets. The closer you get to what you're fighting for, the more opposition you see, because you're getting closer. And we're experiencing that right now here in the California state reparations movement. Because we're getting closer, and as I mentioned, we right now are 2 steps away from the governor's desk, 2 steps away. Appropriations Committee, floor of the Senate, floor of the Assembly for Senator Bradford's bills. For ACA 8, which is in the Senate, we are 2-3 steps away from the California ballot. So we're getting closer on all of these bills. As you get closer, people start to take notice more, and some of the opposition grows louder. And so I want to just talk a little bit about some of the opposition and what you should expect for those of us here who I know are in support of these efforts. So one, some of the types of opposition that we've heard really revolve around people who've opposed the bill on this sort of general question of fairness. And there's there are 2 sort of big kinds of fairness opposition arguments that we hear. The first kind of opposition, fairness opposition kind of argument that we hear sounds kind of like this. My family didn't have anything to do with slavery. My family came here after the end of slavery. We didn't have anything to do with it. And so why should we be responsible for doing anything to fix what happened? The other kind of fairness opposition argument that we hear a lot of is, well, there were a lot of groups that bad things happened to. Why are you just focused on this group? It's not fair to focus only on this group when a lot of bad things happen to all these other groups too. And so I want to just raise those 2 arguments for you because you're going to hear a lot of that over the next several weeks and months. So to the first question, about fairness and about whether or not, we should be, paying for something that we didn't have, anything to do with. So the first point I'd make is that, what we're asking for is our state and our government to repair the harm that it did. We're not asking for any individual people to come out of their pocket and pay for reparations. That's not what this is about. This is about our government. And so the first thing you want to do is frame this correctly. This really is a debt owed by the government of California and the government of the United States of America. Secondly, though, when as a part of being a citizen of a government, a citizen of a country, you inherit all of the great things that come with being a part of this government and this country and this this place, but you also inherit all of the debts that come with it also. That's what it means to be a part of a collective. That's what it means to be a part of a society, that we share in all of the good things and all of the not so good things too. And then to the other part, the other question about the fairness, about other groups and how other groups were harmed too. Well, the first thing we'd say is that, well, many of these other groups actually did receive reparations for the harm that was done. Our indigenous brothers and sisters received some kind of compensation depending on which tribes and which nations they are. Damn sure not enough, but there's something. Our brothers and sisters who were survivors of the Jewish Holocaust received reparations, received repair for the harm that was caused. Our Japanese American brothers and sisters received repair for the harm that was caused. The victims of California's forced and involuntary sterilization program, which occurred from the early 1900s through the 1980s in California prisons. And if you don't know, California had a forced and involuntary sterilization program for women in California prisons that we paid reparations for in, I believe, 2020 and 2021. These individuals received reparations. Those who were survivors of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, they also received compensation and reparations as well. So many of these groups did receive reparations, but one of the groups, actually the group that has not received repair for the harm, are those of us whose ancestors were enslaved and then emancipated in these United States. You're going to hear a lot of these two kinds of arguments over the next several days, weeks, and months. And we want you to be well prepared and well equipped to win against those arguments. So there's a lot more that I want to say, a lot more that I can say, but I want to stop right there, actually, because I really do want to get to your comments and your questions, and I want to talk to you directly, because I think that's one of the best ways that we can learn. So with that, I'll stop my presentation. I hope I didn't go too long, but it looks like we had a little bit of extra time, so I took the liberty of the extra time, but I'm on time. And so now I'd like to pass it back to our amazing moderator and host, Lena.
Wow, Chris, that was just really tremendous. Thank you so much. Let's just first of all, either on physically or virtually, thank Chris for that tremendous overview. Rather than calling on people to actually turn off mute and come on and ask questions, we're asking you if you could please put your questions in the chat. And you covered so many different points, and one of the things that you noted is really one of the champions of legislation has been Senator Bradford, who's in his last term. And you commented that there were 20 plus bills that initially were written and presented, but right now we have essentially 3 specific to reparations, and one sort of adjacent to reparations, or 2 that have survived. Can you talk about a little bit about maybe down the line what might continue to happen around legislation related to this issue?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for that question, because you actually give me a great point to jump off from, because as I mentioned, there are 20 different bills introduced originally. Many of those bills are still moving through the legislative process. So for example, you may have seen some reporting recently about the apology, right, which is AB 3089 by Assembly Member Reggie Jones Sawyer. there is a bill, AB 1986 by Assemblymember Isaac Bryan that deals with the banning of books and critical race theory. There are other bills as well, and many of those bills, I think actually a majority, at least 17 of the 20 bills are still moving through the legislative process. But what we did as a coalition is we looked through the list and we said to ourselves, which of these bills do we think are actual reparations bills? And which of these bills do we think are the most meaningful of the reparations bills? And this is important to note here too, because right now as a people, and y'all seeing this happen publicly in real time, we as a people right now are going through a process of deciding for ourselves what our repair looks like, what are reparations to us and what are not reparations to us. I mentioned earlier that the California Reparations Task Force uses the international framework for how it defines reparations: compensation, restitution, rehabilitation, guarantees of non-repetition, and satisfaction. Those 5 things together equal reparations according to the California Reparations Task Force. But also a part of the international standards for reparations is a principle that the group that is harmed decides what they want their repair to look like. And so as we look through the list of about 20 bills, we said, which of these bills do we think are actual reparations bills, and which do we think are the most meaningful? And then we picked 5, and then we were always going to support ACA 8 because we were supporting this effort before. So there was a previous effort to do this called ACA 3. So we were supporters then. So we were going to support ACA 8 no matter what, which is the End Slavery in California Act, to remove the involuntary servitude exception from the state constitution. But to us, ending slavery is not reparations. Ending slavery is ending slavery. And to be honest with you, it's kind of a prerequisite to do reparations. It's hard to do reparations when you are still doing the thing that you need reparations for. So we looked through the list and picked what we thought were the 5 that we thought had the best, most meaningful chance of actually impacting people's real lives in an immediate way. So many of the bills are still moving through the process. At least 17 of those bills are still moving through the process. But the California Legislative Black Caucus said early this year, when they introduced their original package of reparations legislation, the 20 or so bills, that they intend to introduce reparations legislation for at least the next 3 years. So for at least the next 3 years, we're going to have some kind of bills called reparations moving through the state legislature, at least the next 3 years. So we have more stuff coming later. I think what everybody's looking for are the direct compensation bills, are the bills that are focused on direct compensation. And to be quite honest with you, we heavily focus on the direct compensation, and we know there are all kinds of thoughts and thinking about that. But to us, we say that pretty often. First, it's not compensation if it does. It's not reparations if it doesn't have compensation. Firstly, but secondly, we believe that the best way to meaningfully impact people's real lives is to financially and economically empower people directly. And so we'll be working on those over the next several years also.
Wow, that's great. And, on piggybacking on that, thank you for the talking points specific to, how we might address some of the opposition as it comes up. We do have, comment in here or question in here about what's happening in Evanston, Illinois, about the possibility that, there will be lawsuits in response to any legislations that pass. But specific to one of the, bills that's really very close, as you said, to the governor's desk, SB 1331. You mentioned that it's really, this is a debt owed by the government and not by individuals. But one of the other arguments is that we can't afford it as a state. Can you talk a little bit about how the fund that's being potentially, that will be set up is able to facilitate not just government money, but funding from potentially other sources?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. I love that question. Thank you. So the fund in SB 1331, and this is, I think, part of the last clause of the bill. So if you read the bill, the last clause says something like, this fund can accept funds and funding contributions from any federal, state, private, nonprofit, grant. Right? So the California Reparations and Reparative Justice Fund will be open to contributions from private actors, from nonprofit actors, from the federal government, from the state
Philanthropy.
governments, et cetera, from wherever and whenever. But I want to get to, because underneath your question, well, really to the heart of your question is, can we afford this? And that's another sort of kind of opposition argument that we hear a lot too. Can we afford this, or we can't afford this? We heard a little bit of this earlier this week in the debate in the Assembly Judiciary Committee, around, some of the figures that the State Reparations Task Force calculated for how much was stolen and taken and lost from our community over, the generations. The task force estimated that just across a subset of the harms that they looked at, just across 5 of the 12 different harms that they looked at, that the state had extracted and stolen something like $800 billion of wealth from the particular community of the descendants. And so the, folks in the opposition space, are taking that and then saying, well, okay, if California has to pay $800 billion, that's going to mean that your taxes have to go up, which will then, cripple the state's economy, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll make 1 or 2 points here. One, I think you all may know, but California is the 4th largest economy on planet Earth. Our state of California has the 4th largest economy on the planet we call Earth. Our state does more business, has a larger economy than all other countries in the world, with the exception of 3. And one of those 3 is our country. So that's the first point I'll make. Secondly, California, as a state, we spend about at least $250 billion every single year in our state budget. So we have at least a $300 billion state budget every single year. So it's hard for me to believe that the 4th largest economy on planet Earth, which spends $250 billion every year, is broke and can't afford to pay back what it owes. Really, California can afford reparations through a number of ways. I'll give you a couple of examples. One, our state could, and this was a part of this was a part of the original version of SB 1331. Our state could require that our reserve funds, parts of our reserve funds, be used to fund reparations. If you don't know, California has 4 reserve funds, not 8, 4 reserve funds. Okay? And these are funds that we put money away every year into. We just stack the money and stash the money every year. Okay? Sometimes we dip into it a little bit. Sometimes we don't. A lot of times we use our budget surpluses to put into these reserves, but we have 4 reserve funds across the state of California. Some we can use, some are a little bit harder to use, but the point is we have reserve funds. We have funds sitting, waiting to be used. So we could use some of our reserve funds. This was actually in the original version of SB 1331. Also, we could, for example, and this was actually one of the proposals by Senator Stephen Bradford when he was on the task force, we could say something like, we're going to require 0.5% of California's $250 billion budget every single year to be used to fund reparations. Okay? 0.5% of our state budget. Okay? So we could use our general fund as well, in addition to our reserve funds. There are all kinds of ways to fund reparations efforts. The point is, right now, we're beyond the question of if. Right now, we're on the question of how and when and how much. But can California afford reparations? Yes, absolutely. It's just a matter of, do we have the will, do we have the power, and do we have the courage?
I think we do. I want to just really make sure that everybody on this meeting tonight really go through all of the great information and links that have been put in the chat. One of them is supportreparations.org/endorsements. There's a list of at least 100 organizations, multicultural, multiracial, faith, et cetera, that are supporting reparations in California. So you're on the right side of history here. And clearly you're here tonight because you want to know, where do we go from here, and how do we demonstrate, and how do we, all collectively show our support for this historic moment. So can you did allude to that, and you did talk about making sure that they, first of all, show up in person if you can do that up in Sacramento. But also reach out to your local elected official to also, and is there a sample letter? Do they sort of just, draft something personally? How does that work practically?
Yeah, so and so for example, I'm actually going to drop right now in the chat. I'm going to drop a sample support letter for ACA 8 right now. So the answer is yes, there are sample support letters available for you right now. And we're really focused right now on ACA 8 because that bill, and this is breaking news, has been scheduled for hearings for next Tuesday in the Senate Elections and Constitutional Amendments Committee, 1021 O Street, room 2100, 9:30 a.m. That's 1021 O Street, room 2100, 9:30 a.m. And so we're asking folks to show up in person and give public comment. You don't have to do anything special. Just show up, sit there, and be ready for the hearings to be called, and then ready for the bill to be called up, and then make public comment in support of the bill when the time comes. But if you're an organization, or if you're someone who can't attend the hearings, but you just want to make sure that your support is on record, yes, we have a template support letter for you. And again, I'm going to drop that in chat in a moment here as well. And there are other ways to support also. So again, we're focused on ACA because that's the most immediate thing. But we're going to be scheduled for hearings in the California Assembly Appropriations Committee, we expect very, very soon. And we need and want folks to show up for those hearings when they're scheduled, but also before the hearings, we're asking folks to reach out to their elected officials and schedule meetings with them to talk to them and encourage them and advocate on behalf of all of these bills, but in particular, SB 1403, SB 1331, and SB 1050. To do that, there are a couple of ways that you can do that. The one way that I'll specify right now, though, is that we love to work with you to schedule those meetings and execute those meetings. So if you send us an email at cjecofficial@gmail.com, cjecofficial@gmail.com, and let us know that you'd like to meet with your elected official to fight for reparations legislation, encourage them to fight and vote for reparations legislation. We will work with you to schedule the meetings. We'll attend the meetings with you, and we'll obviously train with you to attend them beforehand, and then we'll go to the meetings with you. Okay? So we're happy to work with you to advocate to your elected officials directly. It's a part of what we do on a regular basis. There's all kinds of ways for folks to support, but those are just some important key ways that they can do it right now.
Okay, great. Well, that is super helpful. And any of you who are not sure who your representative is, I also drop that link in the chat. So you just click on these, and then you can all go back later after this call, and rather than jumping on Instagram, get to work on being active participants in our democracy here in the state of California and everywhere else. Let me see. I'm trying to very skillfully go through some of these questions in the chat here. But specific to one of the things that I think some people may still need some clarification on is, who is eligible for reparations? And and I really appreciated your point that compensation really does need to be a part of this, because it is tangible, and it really and not to mention that money that comes into my pocket goes back into the state of California, right? Or so it's going to help our economy no matter what. But can you just address that? Who is eligible specifically?
Yes. Thank you for that.
Because that was a big part of the hearings.
Oh yeah. And goes back to before the hearings too, because actually when we were negotiating language on AB 3121 back with Secretary Weber, we proposed a series of amendments to the original version of AB 3121 that would really focus this effort on descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States. Because in the original version of AB 3121, there was language, sort of targeting the group called African Americans. But the definition of African Americans, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, and the definition that the state of California uses, is something like anyone with ancestry in the Black racial groups of Africa. That's a huge number of people. There are people in that group who are descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States. There are people in that group who are not descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States. And so we proposed to Dr. Weber that the bill actually explicitly say descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States. And so when we proposed that to Dr. Weber, she said, oh, yeah, that's who I was talking about anyway. Right? I was using the word African Americans, but that's who I wanted anyway. And so, of course, she accepted those amendments. And so that's why in the final version of AB 3120, when it says something like, this is a task force to study and develop reparations proposals with special consideration for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. So when the task force, so this was the original intent of Dr. Weber anyway. And Dr. Weber said as much when she was asked to come to the task force to help them decide who would be eligible. Dr. Weber said this same thing. But there was question really about that special consideration language, because it said, well, it says special consideration, but it doesn't say the only consideration. So are there any other groups who would be considered? And so Dr. Weber clarified that as well. She said, yes, there's one other group that I want you to consider in addition to the descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States. I'd like you to consider also the descendants of the free Blacks who were living in the United States during the slavery era, because of the special kind of danger that they were in. And if you think about, and many of us probably saw the movie 12 Years a Slave, about the brother Solomon Northrop, who was a brother who was born free and then kidnapped and sold into slavery. So this is a person who was born free in the United States and then kidnapped and sold into slavery. So Dr. Weber wanted to make another consideration for folks who are descendants of persons like that as well, because of the special kind of danger that they were in during that slavery era. So the task force then heard those thoughts and ideas, and then voted in March of 2022 to codify Dr. Weber's original intent. And so to be eligible for reparations in California, generally you have to have 3 things going for you. I'm saying a half for a certain reason. So first, you have to be a current California resident. First. Okay. Secondly, you have to be a living descendant of someone who was enslaved in the United States, or a descendant of someone who was a free Black person who was living in the United States before the year 1900. Current California resident, or descendant of someone who was enslaved in the United States, or descendant of someone who's free and Black living in the United States before the year 1900. Your ancestors do not have to have been enslaved in the state of California. They just have to have been enslaved somewhere in the United States. And again, this is partly because of the original intent of Dr. Weber. And also, though, and this is important too, and this may come up in some of the questions, but so I think many of us are familiar with Proposition 209 and our California Constitution, which bars us from doing anything, spending any government money for any specific or particular racial group of people. So if the task force had said to be eligible for reparations in California, you need to be a California resident and self-identify as Black, and then that's it, that would have been very, very vulnerable to legal and constitutional challenge. And especially now after the Supreme Court, really stepped on affirmative action last year. And so the task force also asked for some legal and constitutional advice about how to build a reparations program that passes constitutional and legal muster. And the constitutional and legal experts testified to the task force and said, to make your reparations strong to withstand legal challenge, you have to structure your eligibility so that it's not based on any racial qualification, but that it's based on a particular harm, specifically your descendancy from U.S. chattel slavery.
Right, that's great. I'm gonna go, just sort of to something tangential to that, because, you're really talking about, how the legal system could, in the future, undermine and derail this process. I mean, 40, 50 years after Roe versus Wade, here we are, right? So, and I don't want to put you on the spot. So if you don't want to comment on this, you're not prepared, just let me know. But when I talk about the ruling on the Tulsa race massacre and the court ruling that just came down on that, do you see any kind of, just, if you're familiar with it, what are your thoughts on that? Can you just make a comment on that? And then how do you think that might inform where we are with respect to reparations in California in terms of just addressing, actual land taking, which is SB 1050?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and so and I hope folks have seen the news, the unfortunate news that a court recently dismissed one of the last cases brought against us, the city of Tulsa, for the Tulsa race massacre with living survivors. More than 100-year-old living survivors. And when I saw the decision, I wanted to throw up. I'm just gonna keep it real with y'all. It turned my stomach. Interestingly enough, attorney Demario Solomon Simmons, who's been representing the families in Tulsa, actually was invited to testify before the California Reparations Task Force and talk about the work that they did in Tulsa. And we actually had some conversations, with those folks, during that process also to learn from them. So very, very unfortunate. And I hope Demario and his team and the elders do not give up, because it's worth the fight. And we're here to support them in any way that we can. And please do give your love and blessings and support to our family and our elders in Tulsa. Living survivors of an actual massacre had their case thrown out just in the last 24, 48 hours. Crazy. But
Crazy.
Yeah, it's bad. So how's that impact the work that we're doing here? Let me also give you some other news, kind of breaking, but it's in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Many of you may be familiar with the city of Evanston, Illinois, which really is the country's first attempt at a city level reparations effort. And that effort was recently sued and is now under a class action lawsuit on behalf of 6 plaintiffs who are representing a class of tens of thousands of people opposing Evanston's reparations program. Now, yes, there are folks in Evanston who, folks who are part of the Evanston community who, did not, think that their program was reparations. And those folks I know are still working on that now. But the point I want to make here is that the Evanston reparations effort is now under legal threat as well. Let me give you some even more breaking news. The folks who are potentially likely to challenge reparations efforts here in California have already been signaling their appetite to challenge SB 1403, SB 1331, and SB 1050, okay? And more too. Okay? So I say all that to say, and I want to prepare you all, prepare us all for a potential legal challenge. Okay? I think we should be prepared and planning for legal challenges to what we do. Whether the challenges will be successful is a different question. We believe we will win any legal challenge, but we are under no illusions. We do expect that our work will be challenged legally. When it will happen, we'll see. Sooner maybe rather than later rather than sooner, we don't know. But rest assured that we are preparing for legal challenge right now. That's no secret, because I think that's the wise and smart thing to do. But I was very upset to see what happened to our folks and family in Tulsa, and I want to give a shout out to the elders there and also our folks and family, working with the legal team, Demario Solomon Simmons. And again, just to pin this to the last question about eligibility, this is partly why the state task force decided the kind of eligibility that it did. Partly why, not all the way why, but partly why the task force decided on that kind of descendancy-based eligibility to help strengthen our legal case when we are challenged.
Yeah, that's great, Chris. And really it is heartbreaking. But it really just makes us, reminds us that this fight may not end with this generation. And we are responsible to prepare the next generation to continue the fight, right? So, you know, it's just something that we have to be prepared to do. We're really down just the last 2 minutes, a few minutes. And so, you know, what I'll just say in wrapping up is, again, thank you so much to Chris for your passion, for your, you know, your commitment to this work and your leadership and your willingness to be here, but also to share expertise and infrastructure of CJEC with all of us, you know, with just an email to you. We'll be, you know, following up on that, you know, that offer that you put out in front of us to continue this work, to work collectively. To everyone on the call tonight, thank you so much for being here. And, you know, whatever group you're representing, take the water back, continue to ensure that people understand what's at stake and how they can be on the right side of history with just a letter, with just a phone call. And we know that the information came at you fast and furious tonight. So we really want to ensure that if you really want to take next steps, we will be following up with you to you know, very, very practically work with you to do whatever it takes to keep this alive. And, you know, chills went down my spine when you said this is 2 steps from the governor's desk. So I just have to ask, and I know you're not, you know, you don't have a crystal ball, but what do you think? What do you think? Is he going to sign it?
I think our governor is a smart man. I think he's a wise man. I think he will understand the importance of these pieces of legislation. By the way, I didn't say this, but I do want to say that these are the first bills in California history specifically for descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States. The first bill specifically for residents whose ancestors were, you know, kidnapped and human trafficked, et cetera, into the United States. So I think Governor Newsom will recognize the moment in history that we're in. He appears to me to be a man that recognizes history and wants to take his place in it. And so I'm confident that he will recognize that and do the right thing and sign these bills into law and with our help.
Thank you. You know, from your mouth to God's ears, right? With just 1 minute to close, you know, if you would like to continue to work with us and be a part of the San Francisco Black Jewish Unity Coalition, all of our meetings are currently virtual, so you don't have to just be in San Francisco. If you want to join, we will certainly let you know when we'll be meeting, and also more about the committees that we host to continue social and economic justice for African Americans in San Francisco, but out throughout the state. So, and then lastly, this Saturday in San Francisco, if you're in San Francisco, in the Fillmore District, there will be the official Juneteenth celebration. So, you know, we don't want to just focus on the work, we also have to take some time to just celebrate the victories, right? And we've made it this far. That's a victory. So please go out and celebrate, you know, the victory of Juneteenth and the victory of the progress of reparations in California. Last word, Chris, or anybody?
Thank you. We are living and sitting in a history book. Let's give them something to write about.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. And I bid you all good rest of the week.
Thank you.
And enjoy being your moderator tonight.
Thank you, Lena. You're awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena.
Yes,
Thank
you're amazing.
you.
Thank you, Lena.
So great.
Thank you all so
It
much.
was awesome. Oh my
Everybody,
goodness, awesome.
thank you
Thanks,
so much.
everyone.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Thank you.
Brett and team.
It's been a
Brett, great
pleasure.
job. And
Thank
great
you.
job.
Pleasure.
Jennifer, great job.
Hey, team. I see you, Raphael. Hi, Julia. Hi, Deborah. Terry, Leslie, Ed, Monia, Carol. I'm gonna name everybody right now. Thomas, Karen, Phyllis, Barbara,
You brought your whole
everyone.
posse.
Eric, yes, Eric, thank you so much. See you soon.
Night.